From your local election headquarters, this is a special presentation of News 8.
News 8 is your local election headquarters. I'm Adam Chodak. Thank you so much for joining us. It is election season throughout the United States, and soon New Yorkers will be casting their votes to vote on their candidates. Which candidates will take office, that is up to you. And a reminder that Election Day is now November 3rd this year. However, you will have the opportunity to vote before the month is out, should you want to do that. Early voting begins on October 24th in New York State. And if you need an absentee ballot, you can apply for one, and you have until October 27th to submit your application. Tonight, we continue our series of debates in order to help you, the voter, decide who you want in office. Taking the debate stage tonight, two of the candidates for New York's 25th Congressional District. They are Democrat and incumbent candidate Joe Morelle and Republican challenger and attorney George Mitris. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. And before we get going with opening statements, I do quickly want to add that the October 27th deadline, that is to get your absentee ballot application. You can submit it up until Election Day. Okay, opening statements. We're going to begin with Mr. Mitris.
Thank you, Adam. Ladies and gentlemen, you are the reason why I'm running. I came to this country from Greece at the age of 8. Thanks to the opportunities that only this country provides, I have achieved all my personal goals. I've never had any political aspirations, but I am running now because the country and the community that I love is divided and is in pain. Ladies and gentlemen, we need, and it's not our fault. This is a reflection of a divided Congress, and we need to fix it at its source. And we're not going to be able to fix it by sending the same politicians that are responsible in the first place. We need strong, independent thinkers that can stand up to their own party and reach across the aisle to form friendships and coalitions and compromise so that we can heal our community and start fixing the problems that we all face. I am running to raise your expectations of what a congressman can be, should be, and will be if he focuses on his people's problems rather than play party politics. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mitris. We're now going to go to the second opening statement, this one from the incumbent in this race, Congressman Joe Morelle. Mr. Morelle.
Good evening. I want to thank you, Adam, and everyone here at WRLC for hosting tonight's debate and providing a forum for voters to gather information ahead of this year's election. I believe this is one of the most important elections in the life of our republic. Across America, we're facing unprecedented challenges, an historic global health crisis, an economic downturn that's left millions out of work and threatens to injure millions more. We face grave racial inequities which prevent people of color from having a real opportunity to achieve the American dream. And we're led by a president who seeks to divide our citizens and undermine the very foundations of our democracy. These are real challenges, but I will continue to tackle them head on and do everything in my power to help families get through these uncertain times. It's been an honor to serve this community in the House of Representatives, and I hope to have the privilege of continuing to advocate on your behalf. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morelle, and I want to thank Mr. Morelle as well for walking right into my first question, which is going to be directed to Mr. Mitris, and it has to do with helping people out during the pandemic, and not just people, but businesses as well, not-for-profits. A lot of them are suffering right now, and there's a clash in Washington over what a stimulus package should look like. So my question to you is very simple. What kind of package would you push for right now?
Thank you, Adam. You know, we are in the middle of a pandemic. First of all, 200,000 people are dead. And we need to be mindful of that. At the same time, you know, our people are suffering. They cannot pay their bills. They cannot pay the rent, the mortgage, their cars. And when someone is in real trouble, you throw them a lifeline. That's exactly what the stimulus package is supposed to do. Throw a lifeline. There's over $1 trillion in difference between the Republican bill and the Democratic bill. And much of the core provisions are pretty similar, actually. Where the difference is in programs that really do not belong in a lifeline. So Mr. Mushin's bill, interestingly enough, is somewhere in the middle, a compromise. If I were in Congress, I would urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, I would remind them that this is a package intended to help our community, to get businesses, to save our small businesses, many of which have closed, many of which are on the verge of closing. We need to remember what this is about. We cannot play politics with our people's lives. And this is financial life. We need to compromise. I would urge for Mr. Mushin's compromise package.
All right, Mr. Mitris, thank you. Mr. Morelle, you have 1 minute for a response.
Well, let me start by saying that 5 months ago today, on May 14th, the House passed the HEROES Act, which I was a co-sponsor, $3.4 trillion of relief to state and local governments, to our healthcare workers who are on the front lines of fighting this pandemic. Money for unemployment insurance for those men and women who have lost their jobs. And millions of Americans today are hurting and worried about their future. Small businesses who, through no fault of their own, not because of an economic downturn, but because of a virus, are facing the prospect of losing their business. So we passed that $3.4 trillion bill 5 months ago today. Nothing out of the United States Senate, nothing from the White House. 2 weeks ago, House went back and passed an updated HEROES Act, $2.2 trillion. And yet we continue to hear conflicting messages. The president at one point pulled the plug on this. Then he said, let's get back to the table. Then he said, let's not. I'll give you individual packages. The problem is we've had no leadership from the United States Senate, and we've certainly had no leadership out of the White House.
And I want to have an add-on, and I'm going to get to Mr. Mitris in a second here because this is an important topic. And the add-on question is for Mr. Morelle. You have certain Republican senators saying, well, why don't we just do a $1,200 check to the American people as a one-off, or aid just to the airline industry? Let's at least get that out there. What's your response to those proposals?
You know, I was asked about this, and I have great sympathies for the airline industry. So you're talking about airline pilots, but you're also talking about flight attendants, you're talking about mechanics, you're talking about baggage handlers. Those are all people who are suffering. But would you pick one industry and do benefits only for them? I think of my friends over at Seabreeze Amusement Park in Irondequoit who will go 18 months without income, and they have 50 full-time employees, not to mention the thousands of students typically that they would help, but there'd be no relief from them under the proposal that had been advanced, never passed by the United States Senate. So you can't pick and choose. All Americans are suffering. 300 million Americans face challenges today. That's small businesses, it's individuals who've lost their jobs, it's healthcare workers, it's first responders. We need a package that will meet the needs of all Americans. That's what we did in the HEROES Act. That's what we did in the updated HEROES Act. It's time for the United States Senate to get off of the dime, to meet us halfway if that's what they want to do. It's time for the White House and the president to lend some stability to this. I frankly think it's probably beyond his ability to do it, but the president needs to lead.
All right, Mr. Morelle, thank you. Mr. Mitris, I'm going to give you a full minute to reply. Again, we want to really dive deep into this one.
I appreciate that. What really bothers me about this answer from the congressman is this. In the first opportunities to speak, it's all party, it's all president, it's them versus us. This isn't about party. Ladies and gentlemen, now you understand why I'm running. We need to, it's as if politicians are hardwired to think in terms of party instead of us, the American people. We need to step back from that. Let's think about the people that are suffering. Half of the American workforce is in small business. Half of Americans are employed by small business. Let's concentrate on them. Let's concentrate on ordinary Americans that cannot pay their bills. You cannot be over $1.2 trillion apart. Fine, they are. I say compromise. Pass it, get the relief that our people need right now. I don't care who gets the credit. I don't care who gets the blame. And I don't want to hear it's the president's fault or it's the speaker's fault or we should follow this bill or that bill. I care about the American people.
Well, if I might just say in response to it, it's easy to stand aside and say, well, just work it out. But we have in the House, and I've co-sponsored both of these bills, very specific proposals, $3.4 trillion in the HEROES Act, $2.2 trillion in the updated HEROES Act, I haven't heard my opponent say one specific thing about what he would be for or against, what he's willing to do with or without. So it's easy to say, just get together and compromise. Yeah, we would do that if there were people to compromise with, if the Senate were willing to come to the table. They haven't even passed a single bill in 5 months to deal with this. The president, from your party, I'm sorry, but that's the ticket you're running on, the president said, pull away from the negotiations. Then he says, go big or go home. And he says, well, let's do one-offs. I mean, it's impossible to negotiate with someone who keeps moving the goalposts. So I don't go to work to help Democrats. I go to work to help every single person in this community, every person in this country. That's what I want to do.
Mr. Mitris, I'll give you 30 seconds and then we'll move on.
Well, I've already mentioned that the core provisions, the $1,200, the anywhere from $400 to $600 in unemployment, the president compromised at $500, and certain small business stimulus to get our economy opened up again. You know, at least we can come together around these core provisions. Leave the $1.2 trillion that is for other projects. There's plenty of time to debate and talk about other things. Let's get the money into the hands of the American people.
All right, this next question comes from Mike in Webster, and it's going to be directed to Congressman Joe Morelle. Mr. Morelle, Mike is very worried about the current budget gap, the deficit going on here in New York State, mainly in response to the COVID-19 outbreak. What role do you think the federal government should play in helping out New York State in particular?
Well, I think that's a great question, Mike. And remember, when we talk about funding for state and local governments, which has been in both the proposals that we've passed in the House, it's not to be able to help the government itself or even to help local governments. If you think about the state of New York, 2/3 of all the money they take in goes back to local governments in the form of support for school districts, in the support of not-for-profits that are dealing with communities like the developmentally disabled community. So all of these organizations, I'm on Zoom meetings day in and day out with groups that are facing challenges because of the lack of support. The President and Senator McConnell have essentially said they don't want to provide any support for state and local governments. Yet the decline in revenues, which is causing the problems they face, is entirely due to the virus and the pandemic. So we need to make sure, this is my top priority, to get funding for state and local governments so they can continue to provide support for people in this community and communities across this country, and I'm going to continue to fight to make that happen.
Mr. Mitris, 1 minute.
I apologize. Could you give me that question again?
Of course. The federal government can play a role in helping out states that are financially hurting right now because of the pandemic. So what type of help do you think that the federal government should be giving to states in need, specifically New York?
Well, Adam, everything that I consider from the perspective of our people. Quite frankly, I believe the federal government has a role to help states that are hurting as a result of the pandemic. The problem is that there are some states like New York that have been hurting before the pandemic because of irresponsible fiscal policies. New York State, for example, was $6 billion in the red. So we don't want to encourage that kind of behavior going forward. My concern really is, always thinking of our people first, is that if we don't bail out and provide relief to the states, even for deficits that were before the COVID, the impact is going to be felt here locally. So I am all for the federal government stepping in, certainly with respect to COVID-related issues. As a matter of principle, I don't like to bail out pre-COVID fiscal irresponsibility, but I think we need to take a look at this very carefully to avoid paying locally.
All right, we're going to go from state finances to your finances. It seems like a lifetime ago, but in 2017 there was tax reform in Washington, and that meant there's now a limit on the amount of state and local taxes. You probably heard people talking about SALT here in New York that can be deducted on the federal income tax return. In the next 2 years, Mr. Mitris, would you push for reversal of that particular tax reform change?
Well, actually, yes, I would push for reversal of that because I understand what the president did. And I understand the reasons behind it. But the problem is the impact and the pain has fallen on our local people. They do not get to deduct the taxes that they pay. And these are people that work hard in our community. They pay their taxes, and they should get some relief, at least in the form of the deductions that were in place before SALT. So I am all for it. I would definitely push for a reversal of that. Anything that helps, and I understand what the president was doing, by the way. What the president was doing was he did not want the federal government to subsidize states for fiscal irresponsibility through that provision. Unfortunately, again, the impact falls disproportionately upon our people. So I would look for other ways to force states to be fiscally responsible than put the burden squarely on our people. So in that regard, on that issue, I would also not agree with the president, and I would reverse that.
Mr. Mitris, thank you. Mr. Morelle, 1 minute to respond.
Yeah, so we should, for people who don't necessarily understand what this is really double taxation. You pay federal taxes and then you pay state taxes, or you pay state taxes and then you pay federal taxation on it again. It's the end of federalism as we know it. Since the beginning of income tax, we've always allowed deductibility for your state and local taxes. Donald Trump ended that with his $2 trillion tax bill, 83% of which benefited the top 1% of Americans in the United States, added $1.4 trillion to the national deficit, and did virtually nothing to stimulate the economy. In the HEROES Act, which I talked about, which we passed 5 months ago today, we restored the SALT deductibility instead of the cap, which is in place. This is critically important for all of us in New York, because in time, everyone will face the challenges of having double taxation. Against everything that we have believed in federalism in the United States, it needs to be repealed. I'll continue to advocate. I'm a co-sponsor of the bill that will do that, and hopefully in the next Congress we'll get that done.
Mr. Mitris, 30 seconds.
Thank you, Adam. Well, let's not lump a lot of things together that don't necessarily correlate and shouldn't be discussed together. The total tax bill was something else. It was designed to bring jobs and factories and employment back to our country. So I am a very strong proponent of criticizing anybody from any party and giving credit where it's due from either party. On the overall tax issue, I have to agree with the president. On the SALT tax issue, I have to strongly disagree. So let's look at everything, not from perspective of party, but from the interest of the American people.
Mr. Morelle, we've seen the Black Lives Matter movement play out in our own backyard here in Rochester with the Daniel Prude case. Do you see any type of legislation that you'd like to push forward, perhaps yourself, that could address the current crisis that we're in between police and the community in our cities throughout the country?
Yeah, let me just say that I think for all of us, this was a summer that really brought to fore the challenges faced by people of color in the United States and the racial disparities and inequities. And frankly, I was personally horrified to see the video for the first time in August on that led to the death of Mr. Prude. I joined protests this summer for Black Lives Matter and following the death of Mr. Prude and the making aware of the video. There are a number of things we can do. I'm a co-sponsor of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act of 2020, which passed the House with substantial support. That would end chokeholds. It would end the militarization of our police. It would end qualified immunity for police officers who avoid civil responsibility for their actions. It includes additional dollars for training for law enforcement so they could better be prepared to deal with things like mental health arrests, which is what the response was for Mr. Prude. So we have a long, long way to go in this country. I'll continue to support the Black Lives Matter movement. I'll continue to work on legislation which brings mental health professionals to the scene when someone has called for a mental health arrest or made a call to 911 about a mental health issue. We have a long way to go, but we're continuing to work on it. I'm a proud sponsor of a number of pieces of legislation that would do just that.
Thank you, Mr. Morelle. Mr. Mitris, your response?
Adam, I was introduced to this country at the age of 8 on a little black and white television set with images of Dr. Martin Luther King and attack dogs and water hoses. And 52 years later, we are still trying to solve social and racial issues. That's a shame. We need to come together as a community and fix this problem instead of paying lip service. But one question that keeps nagging at me, and this has to do with you, Congressman Morelle. It's been widely reported in the newspapers that you have tried to get Sabrina Lamar a single county legislator fired from her job at RIT. It's also been reported that you've been somehow involved with the ouster of Vincent Felter, the former minority county legislator leader, of Brittany Wells, the former Democratic county chair, and Lashana Boose, the former acting BOE chair. My question to you is it fit and proper for a sitting congressman at a time when our community needs leadership and unity the most to try to oust sitting elected officials in order to install your own regime? Is that the proper role of a congressman during such times?
Mr. Morelle, I'm going to give you a minute to respond, 30 seconds over the normal reply.
Sure, thanks. I'm frankly not sure what Mr. Mitris is talking about. I will talk for a moment about Sabrina Lamar, a person who works for RIT who appeared in a campaign ad. I sent a single text message to RIT inquiring about whether or not that was appropriate for the college guidelines. Ms. Lamar responded that she felt threatened by my text message. I recognized that was a mistake. I apologized publicly to her. I've offered to meet with her privately. That was a mistake on my part to raise a question because I'm a member of Congress and I recognize words and actions matter. I have released, by the way, the entire text message. It was a single text message. I in no way tried to fire her. That's simply not true. Never threatened RIT. As for the other issues, those are decisions made internally within the Democratic Party, and you'd have to ask a whole bunch of people on why they have a brand new county chair who was elected with overwhelming support, a new woman, Latina, who is the first woman of color to be elected as a commissioner of the Board of Elections. Those are all things I welcome. I'm happy that we have diversity in our party, and we'll continue to have it. But I think Mr. Mitris ought to do a little more homework before he makes, frankly, such outrageous charges.
Mr. Mitris, I'm going to give you 30 seconds. I do want to eventually get to the topics that a lot of people are here to watch, but I will give you 30 seconds to respond.
Well, thank God that we live in the information age, and at this very moment, our viewers can go to Google and plug in Joe Morelle and Sabrina Lamar, Joe Morelle and Vincent Felter. But Sabrina Lamar also filed a congressional ethics complaint against you, charging you for abuse of your office. Perhaps you can enlighten us the status of that congressional ethics complaint. I hope it's not being pushed down the road until after the election and then buried.
Mr. Morelle, 30 seconds.
Well, I have never been notified that there's been an ethics complaint made against me, and you're routinely notified. But I find it interesting. Mr. Mitris is a lawyer. He has failed to file in a timely way his Federal Elections Commission required financial reports. Every single time there's been a report, for a lawyer to do that, have to be told by the FEC that you've failed to comply. He hasn't at all furnished a personal financial disclosure form required of every member of Congress and every candidate. It's months overdue. Frankly, it's interesting. I know more about Donald Trump's financial disclosure than I do about Mr. Mitris. He's violated the law. He hasn't complied. He's an attorney. For him to talk about ethics, I find, frankly, shocking.
All right, so we brought up another issue here, so I do want to extend the offer to Mr. Mitris. Would you like to respond?
Well, as you know, I am a first-time candidate. If there is a glitch, glitches will happen. We have a treasurer, and if he filed late, I'm sure he'll do the appropriate amendments and take care of it. But that's a very different thing than trying to purposefully fire someone from their job and have them file a congressional ethics complaint with the Office of Congressional Ethics, and you are telling us that you are unaware of that, Congressman? Really?
All right.
Wait, let me be clear. I never threatened to fire anyone. That's been clear. I released the one text message inquiring about that. That's it. So Mr. Mitris keeps making allegations that are not true. What I said was I've never been notified of a congressional ethics complaint, and that you have to be when you're a member of Congress, you're notified. I've never been notified. But it's not a small matter to not file your financial disclosure forms when it comes to who you're raising money from or who you're taking money from. You've done it now twice. You had to be notified by the Federal Elections Commission. And frankly, your treasurer doesn't sign your forms. You do. You should check. You sign them yourself. I know it's unusual to do that, but that's what you've been doing. And as it relates to your personal financial disclosure, whether or not you own stock in companies, what kind of property you own, what kind of loans you may have taken out, those are all required under your personal financial disclosure. You are months late. You've never even filed one. You can find it for all 435 members of Congress, every candidate who's running. You just can't find George Mitris's. But you know more about Donald Trump, who's fought tooth and nail to make sure no one knows his financial disclosure, yet you know more about his than you do about Mr. Mitris, who wants to run for Congress. And I don't think it's right to say, well, I'm a first-time candidate, I don't really know much about this stuff. Those are legal requirements. This isn't something that if you're going to serve in the United States House of Representatives, you better know a little bit more than, gosh shucks, I just don't know what the law is. You're an attorney. Look it up, do it, follow the law, let us know what your disclosure is so we know what it is that you have in terms of potential conflicts.
All right, Mr. Mitris, 30 seconds. Let's put this one to bed so we can move on.
Let's put this one to bed. Are you telling us that you are unaware that there is a congressional ethics complaint filed against you, charging you with abuse of your office for trying to get Sabrina Lamar fired from her job at RIT? Is that what you're telling us, that you're unaware of that?
I didn't say I was unaware. What I said, listen carefully, because I don't want to do this again with you. What I said is, I've never been notified. Under the rules, I must be notified. I've never been notified. Didn't say I was unaware. I said I haven't been notified. That's what the rule is. And by the way, that, if I am ever notified, I'll be happy to disclose, as I've disclosed to the public, what the information was. What I'm saying, apparently you don't know, and I'd like you to commit now to filing the personal financial disclosure that every member of Congress and every candidate has to do, which was due months ago, and you've never even filed it. Are you going to ever file it?
I will absolutely do that.
Really?
You know,
Well, you want to tell us why you're 4 months late?
It's like a car inspection ticket.
No, it's not.
If it's over, you inspect it.
No.
It's very different than trying to run over somebody with your car. That would be attempted assault.
Okay.
That's what you did.
Gentlemen,
Okay.
thank you. I appreciate it. We're going to move on to health care now. The current hearing going on right now for the Supreme Court Justice nominee, Amy Barrett, a lot of attention is going to the Affordable Care Act. Should she become part of the Supreme Court, the Democrats are saying that she might strike down the Affordable Care Act. And if that does happen, there'll be a vacuum, so to speak. Again, I'm not making any assumptions. We have no idea what Justice Barrett would do or would not do. But that's the fear amongst some Democrats. So my question to Mr. Mitris is this. Should that happen, what type of health care plan would you push for which would be needed in that very moment?
Well, I believe that every single American deserves affordable health care, Adam. You know, there's 180 million Americans right now that are covered by private health care insurance. There are about 20 million that are covered under the Affordable Care Act. What I really would like to see is even those people that are covered under the Affordable Care Act have access to affordable health care coverage. The principle of insurance has been the same ever since Lloyd's of London first opened its doors in 1686. You expand the risk pool and you drive down premiums. The problem right now is that there is no competition. The risk pool under the Affordable Care Act is the entire country, but we don't give that opportunity to private health. There are 50 tiny risk pools because insurance companies cannot compete across state lines. We need to fix that. The federal government can also not go out on the market and shop for competitive rates for drug prices. I think we need to fix that. So we need to make the playing field fair so we can provide affordable health care and deliver top-notch services, health care services to the American people. I do not trust the government to deliver health care, and neither should you.
Mr. Morelle, 1 minute to respond.
Well, I do strongly support the Affordable Care Act, and I'm very, very concerned that Justice Barrett, if she's confirmed to the Supreme Court, will strike it down. The president's essentially said that that's why he chose her, to destroy the Affordable Care Act. But what does that mean? That means people who have protections against pre-existing illnesses will no longer be protected. The bar on lifetime cap, so you can't have an insurance company say, well, you got enough benefits, you're done, you're not covered anymore. That would go away if the Affordable Care Act is struck down. The ability to negotiate lower drug prices, something I'm very proud of, because I sponsored the bill which passed the House, which would have Medicare negotiate lower prices. So prices of drugs like insulin and other drugs which people take and pay a significant premium as Americans, far more than we do in countries in Europe and Australia. And the other concern that I have around health care is Justice Barrett is certain to strike down Roe versus Wade and end reproductive rights for women around this country. This is the most important issue facing our country, is health care. And unfortunately, Justice Barrett, I think, is going to lead us in the wrong direction and leave many, many Americans, millions, without coverage.
All right, we're going to get into Roe versus Wade when we come back. I know that Mr. Mitris has a response that he wants to get to on that. We are going to head to a commercial for just a minute, and then we'll rejoin with our candidates for the 25th Congressional District race right after this.
From your local election headquarters, this is a special presentation of News 8.
Welcome back to this evening's debate. We are currently joined by two candidates for New York's 25th Congressional District race. They are incumbent candidate and Democrat Joe Morelle and Republican challenger George Mitris. Thank you both once again for joining us. This next question directed towards Mr. Morelle. We're going to jump right back into the issue of the Supreme Court. You mentioned Roe versus Wade. Let's say that is struck down. What legislative remedy, in your mind, could be applied at that time?
Well, I've been a strong supporter of women's reproductive rights since I've had the privilege of serving in the state and in the federal legislature. I'm going to continue to be an advocate for a woman's right to choose what's in their interest and their family's interest. Obviously, there will be a federal legislative response if Roe is struck down, as I expect it will be by Justice Barrett if she's confirmed on the Supreme Court. Another one of the reasons the president has given for choosing her. I think there are a number of things we could do. I don't want to prejudge it entirely, but we will work also with our state partners, because in New York, those protections exist without regard to what the Supreme Court does. One of the things I'm particularly proud of is all the protections we put for women in New York State. So here in New York, people will be protected, but there's clearly going to be a federal response, whether it ends up being a constitutional amendment or whether it ends up being statutory changes. But we are going to work overtime to ensure that reproductive rights of women in the United States continues to be secured. And that's the legacy that was left by many, but not the least of which was Justice Bader.
Mr. Mitris, your response to that? Thank you, Mr. Morelle.
Thank you, Adam. I am pro-choice with limited exceptions, but here's the larger concern. When hyperpartisanship and the inability to pass laws in Congress it results in gridlock, what happens is what ought to be a legislative decision is punted to the Supreme Court, and then we are left to wonder. So what I would like to see is more bipartisanship, more of focusing on our people, and with respect to the process of the nominated judge, Amy Coney Barrett, it is my hope that the process will be given the appropriate dignity and decorum and respect that it deserves. There are people on the Judiciary Committee, there are both Democrats and Republicans. A justice ought to be selected based upon credentials, intellect, character, and their track record. And I wish her well. I understand she's an excellent candidate, and I wish the Senate Godspeed and wisdom.
Mr. Mitris, this next question goes...
Oh, I'm sorry. I want to
Go ahead.
respond to
Please.
that, because
Absolutely.
just last week, Mr. Mitris agreed with me that the president should not have nominated Justice Barrett and that the Senate should not confirm. I mean, we are 20 days away from a presidential election. 10 million Americans have already cast a vote. And this is a big issue for most Americans. A majority of Americans do not want this nomination confirmed. So Mr. Mitris has changed his mind in the last week. Nonetheless, when it comes to compromise, I'm happy to compromise. I wrote 300 laws in the state legislature, every single one with a Republican state senator. But I will tell you this, we're not and we cannot compromise on basic American values like reproductive rights. There can be no compromise on American values. That's where we need to draw the line.
Mr. Mitris.
Yes, my position actually has not changed. What I said was I would have preferred the president to wait, and I did not change my position here. I am merely emphasizing that we really need to come together as a country and as legislators and afford the dignity and respect in the process so we can select justices that will be equal to the task of a co-equal branch in government rather than trying to politicize it, because that just doesn't work.
I want to go back to New York's budget real quick. And again, Mr. Mitris, this question is for you. We may see an effort in the coming year to legalize recreational marijuana. We've already seen it attempted by lawmakers here in the state. Governor Cuomo might get on board. If that happens, there are still federal laws that prohibit it. And we have businesses in the area that are heavily invested in this, waiting to come out and make money on recreational marijuana. Where do you stand on this particular issue when it comes to the federal law as it applies to these types of drugs?
Well, I think we should legalize recreational marijuana. The data is that there are 0 deaths from recreational marijuana. Let's regulate it. Let's tax it. And the people that have been incarcerated because of possession or related charges, we need to release them and expunge their record. But I'm all for legalizing it, and as long as it doesn't hurt the public, I think we should do that.
Mr. Morelle?
Yeah, I supported medicinal marijuana when I was in the state legislature. We'll support recreational marijuana. The role for Congress is to move it off Schedule I, which is to continue to define it as a controlled substance. It should be taken off Schedule I. It should be redefined so that it's not a controlled substance, and allow the states to do what they feel is in the appropriate, I think, for their local communities in their state. I think in New York, it will be legalized. It's legalized in a number of states around the country. But as you said, Adam, and we should acknowledge, it makes it incredibly difficult for people to do business when it's still on the controlled substance schedule at the federal government. So we need to address that. I support bill, and we'll vote on it, I believe, before the year's out to do that.
Mr. Morelle, thank you. We had a mass shooting not all that long ago here in Rochester over on Pennsylvania Avenue. In the aftermath of that, a Rochester police captain during a news conference said, "We have enough gun laws. It's an issue of enforcing the ones we have on the books." So, Mr. Morelle, when it comes to addressing gun violence, do you agree with that statement, or do you think more legislation is needed here?
I completely disagree with that statement. We need to do so much more in the space of gun violence prevention, something that I'm very passionate about. I was elected to the state legislature many years ago because of that, in an effort to ban assault-style weapons, semi-automatic weapons, to make sure that we have registration of guns, and a legislation which I've written and I lead in the House, which is to hold gun shop owners responsible for increasing security and to make sure that they report to authorities when guns are stolen. We've seen just here in the last few years a gun shop that has been robbed repeatedly, guns taken, they end up on our nation's streets, used often in crimes. There is so much more that we need to do, and I'm going to continue to work with groups like Moms Demand Action and Giffords and others to lead the fight to make sure that we have appropriate gun violence prevention measures in the United States.
Thank you, Mr. Morelle. Mr. Mitris, your 1-minute response, please.
The problem is we've been dealing with violence in our community for a long, long time. The newspapers have even dubbed us as the top 25 murder capital in America. That's a monumental failure of a government whose #1 priority ought to be the safety of its citizens. We need, and I don't doubt the congressman's sincerity, but obviously whatever he's been doing has not worked. We need to get guns out of the hands of criminals, not assail the Second Amendment, not to go after law-abiding citizens, but the criminals. We need to get guns off the streets. We need to make our streets safe. And by the way, we really need to change the culture as a government in this community, because when we have bail reform, when we have catch and release, when we shield convicted felons from federal officers, this all gives a signal that we are protecting the criminal and we are shackling our police, and I am absolutely against that.
Thank you, Mr. Mitris. The next question is going to go right back to you, and it has to do with immigration, a topic that we really haven't talked a lot about as of late, given the other issues at hand, but it's an important one, especially for our area. We are a border city, if you will. So the question is this: would you support a pathway to citizenship for the 10 to 12 or however many million undocumented workers are here in the United States?
Is that?
It's directed to you, Mr. Mitris. My apologies.
Thank you. Well, as you know, Adam, I am an immigrant. I came to this country when I was 8 years old. We filled out the paperwork. We waited 2 years. But look, I know what America is to immigrants all over the world. This is a beacon for democracy. We need to continue to be a welcoming, open society. We need to make it efficient and easier for people to come in. When I was walking around the district, I went to Henrietta, and there was a gentleman there from Pakistan, and I asked him the question, well, what do you think about immigration reform? He said, it's very simple, and he said it so eloquently. We need to let good people in and keep bad people out. Having said that, let me tell you a personal story. I had a friend in college who was here on a student visa, and when his student visa expired, let me tell you, Adam, I know the pain in the eyes of someone when there's a knock on the door. We really need a fast track to citizenship to the millions and millions of Americans that are here, that are American in every facet of the word. But we need to reform our immigration system. We need to secure our border, open the gates wide to let people, as the gentleman said, good people that we want in and keep bad people out. And we need a fast track to the millions of Americans that are already here, but that are not documented.
All right, Mr. Mitris, thank you. Mr. Morelle, your 1-minute response.
Yeah, about a year ago, I went down to El Paso, Texas, and spent time in Juarez, Mexico, because I wanted to see firsthand what was going on at the border. What I encountered was a lot of families with very young children who had walked, in some cases, 1,000 miles, knowing that the President of the United States has nothing but hatred for them in his heart and has expressed it, torn families apart, made it so people won't be able to find their children. All they wanted to do was have a better life for their children. Same way that my grandparents, when they came from Italy, Mr. Mitris came from Greece. That's what they want. They want better lives for their families. So these people would march that far, knowing that they were going to find hostility at the border from a president who doesn't want them here. We need a path to citizenship for millions of Americans who, despite the fact, millions of people who, despite the fact that the president has said everything he can to hurt them, that they still want to come to America. They still want to be a part of this. They still want to come here, and we should afford them every opportunity to do that, just like we did for my family and millions of Americans before us.
All right, Mr. Morelle, this question is to you. Not all that long ago, several years now, but in the grand scheme of things, we were talking about photonics in our area. The state dedicated money to it. The federal government promised money to it. We haven't seen as of yet the promise that the leaders who came in told us we would see. Do you still stand by the photonics effort, the institute here in our area? And if so, how will you promote that to get it to the level that people are expecting?
Yeah, so I think it's clear there are some things that people don't understand. The photonics project, which I worked very hard, first of all, to secure state dollars for, at the time the federal government was partnering with us at the state level, but I was very, very unhappy with and pushed back strongly against SUNY Polytech, SUNY Nano taking the lead, and it turns out for good reason. I fought alongside Louise Slaughter and the presidents of both the U of R and RIT to have a Rochester solution. That project is moving forward. It will have promise over time, but the bigger issue is really the idea of optics, imaging, and photonics, something that is a significant cluster here in Rochester, and we have extraordinary expertise. And so we're going to continue to push, because the future is integrated circuits that have photonics on them and use optics and imaging, things that we have great skills in. So what I'm doing, you asked about what we're doing at the federal level, I'm working right now with senators from both parties and members of the House from both parties to fashion a caucus of members who are going to care deeply about the science and innovation, because the future is in this space. And for people who say we should abandon it, that's like saying at the dawn of the computer age, we shouldn't have invested in chips and chip fabs. So this is something we have to do. We are particularly well suited for it. We're on the cusp of enormous success, but we have to stay the course.
Mr. Mitris, 1 minute for your response.
Yes, I love that politicians rush to take credit for something. The fact of the matter is that the Photonics project was an Obama administration project under the RAMI, Revitalization of American Manufacturing and Innovation Program. It was awarded to SUNY Polytechnic. None of the local legislatures had anything to do with it. I agree with the New York State Comptroller, who recently filed a report that basically indicts this project, that condemns this project. 5, 6 years later, only 8 jobs, and we're fleecing the American taxpayer, the local taxpayer here, to the tune of $1 billion. I am absolutely against corporate welfare. To further fleece the taxpayer, to throw more good money after bad, particularly at a time when we can't afford it, I am absolutely against that. It's there. I would partner with private industry to say, we built your stadium, take it, and create jobs. We are not going to throw more money at you. I'm against corporate welfare.
Let me just clear up a few things, because that answer was so badly constructed and so void of any facts. First of all, it's a consortium. It wasn't run exclusively by SUNY Poly or SUNY Nano. It was run by a consortium of universities across the country, including RIT and the University of Rochester. The state of New York was heavily involved. We were the #1 investor in this effort, which is more than just the TAP facility, which Mr. Mitris is talking about. This is a national effort that includes University of California at Santa Barbara. It includes, I believe, the University of Arizona. This is about the new world. It's about innovation. And the state of New York contributed $250 million of investment in this as a national endeavor. So we were very much involved in it. And it's simply not true. We were very involved and continue to be the number one investor. I want to take that to the next level, and frankly, working with Republicans and Democrats in the House and Republicans and Democrats in the Senate, and we're going to continue to make innovation the key policy moving forward of our economic development initiatives.
All right, I want to get to the next question. Mr. Mitris, this one is for you. And it has to do with checks and balances. We saw over the last 2 years the House subpoena members of the executive branch, and at times the executive branch denied that appearance. What is your take when it comes to the House's role and its power when it comes to investigating and holding the executive branch in check?
Well, we have to keep in mind, Adam, that we are very, very fortunate that our founding fathers have designed a system that really rests on two pillars: liberty and equality. And neither one can live without the other. And if you think about it, you take away one, it really destroys the other. And they went to great lengths, and they understood all the different types of governments, from democracies to republics to monarchies to constitutional monarchies. In the system that they gave us, that Ben Franklin said, "It's ours to lose," is absolutely remarkable. And we need to make sure that each co-equal branch remains co-equal and one does not intrude upon the other. That is my biggest concern. And, you know, the partisanship really erodes that type of system, because what happens in a lot of ways is Congress will punt and it will send to the Supreme Court issues that it doesn't want or can't want or doesn't have the political will to address, and then the Supreme Court is left to legislate. It's not supposed to legislate policy. It's supposed to legislate constitutional issues. So I am very, very concerned about politicizing this problem.
I just want to be clear, and I'm sorry if I missed it, Mr. Mitris. Do you support the ability of the House to subpoena members of the executive branch?
Well, I think in terms of subpoenas, every issue has to rest on its own merits. Every case would be different. And the narrowness or the broadness of the subpoena, who it's directed to, whether it's a low-level employee or the president, these are profound. They're not minute details. These are profound questions that go to the very heart of the structure of our co-equal branch system of government.
Mr. Morelle.
Well, I understand why Mr. Mitris doesn't want to answer the question, even though you gave him 2 chances to do it. The truth is that oversight by the Congress is a fundamental principle of our democracy, the ability to oversee the executive. Our founders were very concerned about executive overreach. That's why the Congress has always had the ability to oversight over the executive branch, which does include subpoenas. Well, the problem is Mr. Mitris is having a hard time defending the president, who has run roughshod over oversight of the Congress, the rule of law, has expanded executive privilege far beyond anything ever envisioned by the founders. So yes, the Congress needs the ability to subpoena. That's the only way that we can, as the elected direct representatives of the people, make certain that there is an executive overreach, which I will say, I think it's incontrovertible, that President Trump has run roughshod over not only the Congress but the American people, and executive privilege has been expanded far beyond anything envisioned by any of our founders.
Mr. Mitris, 30 seconds.
Thank you, Adam. You know, the United States Attorney General Bill Barr gave a speech before the trial lawyers of America on this very issue. And it's a wonderful expose. And it's not that the founding fathers were actually concerned about executive overreach, although that's been the narrative, but they were particularly also concerned about legislative overreach. And we don't need to get into it now. It's out there for people that want to research it. I understand the questions very, very well, Congressman Morelle. I am concerned about the integrity of our system.
I didn't say you didn't understand it. I said you just didn't answer it. And anyone who doesn't think that William Barr is the worst attorney general in America's history, I think has missed the point. He has stepped over just about every civil liberty. He has taken the position of the executive branch. He takes orders directly from the president and has not stood up for the American public, which he signs an oath to do.
All right, Mr. Barr, by the way, if you're watching, you're always welcome to come in. I'm happy to interview you. Mr. Mitris, Mr. Morelle, thank you for taking those questions. I want to move on now to our closing statements, and we're going to begin with Mr. Mitris.
Thank you, Adam. Our President Abe Lincoln once said, God must have loved the common man because he made so many of them. The problem with the common man and woman in our district is that we've been forgotten. Our schools are still the worst. Our job market is still the worst. Our community is still one of the most unsafe, violent communities around. I am running to change that. And say what you like, Mr. Congressman Morelle, but the fact of the matter is that you have accepted over $600,000 of special interest and PAC money. I have accepted not one red cent. And you did that to represent their interest, not our interest. I'm running to change the rules, to raise your expectations of what a congressman should be when he works for you and not for special interests or for the party. Thank you.
Mr. Mitris, thank you. Mr. Morelle, it's your turn for your closing statement.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you to the viewers for tuning into this important discussion. It's a great privilege to represent Monroe County in Congress and take action on the issues that matter most to all of you. That's why in just my first term, I've worked to lower the cost of prescription drugs, protect people with pre-existing health conditions, and create economic opportunity for everyone who calls our community home. In the House, we've continued to push back against the worst instincts of a president who works continuously to divide Americans and who undermines at every turn the rule of law and the values that America has always stood for. I'm proud of our work, but there is so much more to do. Together, we can overcome the challenges we face and build a stronger future for our country and for Monroe County. No matter what, please make certain your voice is heard by mail-in ballot, early voting, or on Election Day on November 3rd, and I would be honored to earn that vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morelle, and I want to thank both of you for joining us this evening. I do want to mention that there is a third-party candidate in this race, Libertarian Kevin Wilson, and you can catch my interview with him earlier on in the day. That's over at rochesterfirst.com. Also want to tell you about two upcoming debates next week. The first one that I want to tell you about has two candidates in it, and it's for the 56th State Senate seat. That's going to be for Democrat Jeremy Cooney and Republican Mike Barrett. They're going to take the stage here at News 8. That's going to be on Tuesday, the 20th, starting at 7 p.m., and it's going to be streamed on rochesterfirst.com. Then, the very next day, we are going to have the two candidates for New York's 135th Assembly seat. That's Republican incumbent Mark Johns. He is going to take the stage with Democratic challenger Jen Lunsford. That's going to be on Wednesday, the 21st at 7 p.m. Also will be streamed at rochesterfirst.com. Lastly, I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this. And by watching it, you are participating in democracy. But you really participate by voting, and I hope you do so. Take care.